just ahead of a solid week of thunderstorms in the forecast. I boldly dashed out the front door with my oldest child to hurry to a pond in search of wild guppies. I caught 5 in one scoop. Just as the thunder rolled in and my child declared we had better get in because water is a conductor of lightning. Why was I out there hurriedly gathering guppies? Because my children's beloved neon green glowfish had died, and they were very sad about the lonely pink glowfish left in our tank. And there were multiple reasons not to go to the store to buy another fish. The obvious reason is also the reason for just about everything these days, from forgetting a meeting to eating 5 snacks a day to getting snappy with your loved ones. And you know the reason, it's COVID-19. There is no curbside pickup for live animals. So now, when one needs a fish, one must weigh a new calculus. Is it worth walking into a pet store to buy a new fish if you might walk out with a deadly virus? Or if you might inadvertently spread the virus to a hapless bystander who has multiple risk factors? For a new pet fish? Not worth it, I decided. But there was so much more in that decision to boldly leave the house, take my daughter to the pond, and try to catch some fish. I had heard that freshwater fish populations are struggling, especially some. According to the National Geographic, the migratory freshwater fish population has declined by 76% in 50 years. But I grew up catching and releasing guppies, and I knew we could catch the little wild guppies. When they had babies too many for our tank, we could release them. Our interaction with nature would be fairly neutral. Certainly more neutral compared to driving to an air-conditioned store to buy fish who had barely survived shipping, and before that a fish farm with all the fossil fuels involved in transit and more. So there were environmental reasons for the dash to the pond. Now, there was little chance of us catching another neon green glowfish. That's true. But we got to walk alongside nature. And I got to teach my child a little piece of my childhood. I explained why we needed to go now while the earth was dry, before a week of rain made it treacherously soggy by the water. Walking by the pond, we noticed bright green film where fertilizer had run off and made it hard to see underneath, and we wondered, could the guppies even breathe through that green film? We wondered what it looked like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, before all the lawns. We thought of the poor people who might have fished here, but who couldn't now due to all the film on the water and no fishing signs. And who knows what consequences of eating fish that were there. As we walked along searching for the perfect spot to catch fish, I showed her how to find a firm, low spot by the water and that had a branch you could hold on to in case you slipped, and how to crouch still and hold the net just like this, how to move so that we wouldn't attract hungry ducks our way. We were immersed in the experience. And we came away with 5 tiny fish that are now happily living a life free of duck pills in the tank at home. Now, in that excursion, we turned away from our usual habit of meeting our needs with the convenience of consumerism. We turned away from the "I want it, I'll buy it" solution. Where does that ideal of wish fulfillment as the goal come from anyway? Where did we get the desire to buy a genetically modified pet fish? I thought, what kind of hyper-consumer monsters have we become? I'm so glad, in at least that one decision, that we found another way. We were open and listening to nature, and we were blessed to become more connected to my history and my childhood in Mississippi and her muddy waters. I'm grateful that we broke away out of this habit that we have gotten into. And I want more of that, more connection to nature, more history, my ancestors, and even to justice, not some isolated history lesson or isolated social justice action, but a life integrated, a wholeness that integrates my life, my needs, my family, our land, our history. It's a wholeness I didn't have even in my Mississippi childhood. I grew up 5 miles from the historic African American community known as Turkey Creek in Gulfport, Mississippi. If you want to learn more about this amazing and resilient community, I encourage you to watch the 2013 documentary about it. It's called Come Hell or High Water, The Battle for Turkey Creek. I'll put it in the chat later. From the description about this documentary, it says, descendants of emancipated slaves who settled on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The residents of Turkey Creek have been stewards of the creek's rich wetland habitat for generations. Today, the town of Turkey Creek is surrounded by an airport, big box stores, highways, and an industrial canal, which threatens both the community and its wetlands. When the graves of Mr. Derek Evans's ancestors are bulldozed for the sprawling city of Gulfport, this Boston teacher, Mr. Evans, returns home to stand up to powerful corporate interests and politicians alongside his neighbors. And the documentary shows the course of a decade of action. In addition to this, Mr. Evans was fighting to stop flooding that resulted from all this overdevelopment and threatened all the homes near Turkey Creek. Now, this had been getting worse for years as big box stores went up, but for me, spending almost a decade of my life 5 miles from Turkey Creek, I had no clue about it. I never visited the creek or had any inkling of its caretakers. I didn't know the land and creek were threatened, although I was well aware of the desolation of the land under the box stores because I used to hike it. But I didn't even know Turkey Creek was nearby. And Derek Evans's efforts in the documentary to save Turkey Creek began after I had departed for college, so we never crossed paths. But my mom, Keitha, a social worker on the Gulf Coast, helped support his efforts, and she remembers Derek fondly. What's the lesson here? For a decade, there was no mechanism, no process to urge me to listen to Mr. Evans, my community member, to listen to the people of Turkey Creek who could speak for the land. My cultural lifestyle, my entire focus and energy of my life was designed to focus on my education, my consumption, my participation in some abstract economy. My lifestyle was designed to live on the earth, and anyone or anything of the earth was either background or obstacle. It doesn't have to be this way, and it should not be this way. And there's a very good reason for the way things are. Our dominant culture that we inhabit has us move through places ahistorically because there's an ugliness in the history of place here. If we listen to history and to the people who are living more of the earth, then we have to change our ways. Walking by the pond, if I were to live as a person of the earth, I would need to ask the homeowners to stop choking the pond with fertilizer. I would have to ask the officials to let people gather food. In Mississippi, it could have been part of my lifestyle to learn how all the people of my community were doing and to learn the story of the land. But then I would have had to join the struggle of the people of Turkey Creek and say no to crude and destructive development. What is the story of our church land? We will need to go back before the church purchased the building and land. We'd need to go back before the Tree of Life synagogue gathered here. The land that holds our building has a much older history. It's Cherokee land. They cared for this land for 10,000 years and much more, including the land that I rest upon today. If we listen to this history and to the call from our Indigenous leaders in the action of immediate witness that we witnessed earlier, then there is something we can do to live in a way that is more of the earth we rest on than on the earth. We could respond to the call from our leaders and begin to build relationship with our land's story and caretakers. We can speak with and for earth. When people living of the earth speak, we must learn to be better at listening. Whether it's the Mashpee Wampanoag or the people of Turkey Creek, our neighbors of the Cherokee Nation, it isn't a neat package. It isn't going to sound like, let's save this spot for some pristine natural resource we can all go strolling in. That's not what it means to be of the earth. To be of the earth is to live and breathe the deep down, desperate truth that we are dependent on earth. We have stories and spirit and culture wrapped up in nature. We care for earth like our companion, not like a prize, treasure, or object. Nature, environment, justice, culture, history, they are all bound together with one very important thing we must all care about, no matter where we come from, and that one thing is our shared future. To get good at listening, we must all learn to listen when our prophetic leaders who are Indigenous peoples call us to our better selves. If we are listening, we will, as the action of immediate witness asks, we will gather in solidarity with all Indigenous peoples struggling to preserve their lands, waters, peoples, sacred sites, and sovereignty. We will push for the release of Indigenous water protectors from prisons. We'll work on public policy that's decolonizing, such as establishing an Indigenous Peoples Day, including Indigenous peoples' histories in public education curricula. We would stop and reverse ecological harm in collaboration with and taking leadership from communities who are most consistently and harshly impacted by extractive exploitation of land, water, air, and all beings. We would research and identify and acknowledge the Indigenous peoples historically and currently connected with the land occupied by our congregation. And we would find ways to act in solidarity with or even partner with these Indigenous peoples. And we would re-examine practices like anchoring our UU origins in pilgrim invasion and reifying a fictional Thanksgiving. Our shared future depends on heeding this call. Yet this call has been emanating from Indigenous people for centuries. Why have we not all listened? Like my childhood in Mississippi, our lifestyle does not focus on being of the earth or her people. Our extractive relationship to nature and a cultural obsession with wish fulfillment through consumption has driven us out on a precarious ledge, a ledge where we actually contemplate whether a genetically modified neon green fish is worth risking someone's life to get. Let us step away from the ledge, like I stepped out boldly to the pond. Step away before the storm and go catch some guppies. Let us move away before the roaring throngs of wild consumer wishes take over. Let us move away from the foregone conclusions about development and expansion, stepping away long enough to listen. Listen. We can walk down to the pond softly. Gather only what we need. Return what is needed to Earth's waters. We can respond to the Indigenous people's call for justice and join in the struggle for our future. We can turn aside from consumption, bend down and touch the soil, and become a little more of the earth than on it. Amen. I invite you to join now in singing Hymn 206.